It was supposed to be just another lazy Saturday afternoon, one of those breezy, quiet moments in small-town America where everything feels safe, familiar, and wrapped in the comfort of routine. 11-year-old Carter James was out in the backyard, kicking around his worn-out soccer ball with all the energy a kid can muster after a week of school and chores. His dog, Duke, barked playfully from the porch. The sun was out, and the faint hum of a lawnmower buzzed somewhere in the distance. You know those days where nothing seems out of place, and yet, just under the surface, something feels off. That was the kind of day this was. And in a matter of minutes, that ordinary afternoon would turn into a discovery so bizarre, so deeply disturbing, that Carter's young mind would struggle to understand what he had uncovered. What started with a simple kicked ball would unravel a tightly kept family secret hidden just beyond the barn doors, doors that had always remained locked, without explanation. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that strange gut feeling that someone close to you is hiding something? Maybe a room you weren't allowed to go into, a drawer that stayed locked, or a story that didn't quite add up. That itch in the back of your mind telling you something isn't right, even if everyone around you insists it's all fine? That's exactly the place young Carter found himself in. And let me be real with you. What he stumbled upon wasn't just an odd collection of junk or a forgotten stash of old tools.
No.
What he saw inside that locked barn would not only change how he viewed his father forever, it would drag his family into a situation far darker, far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. This story isn't just about a kid being curious. It's about secrets, survival, and the thin line between trust and betrayal. And I promise you this, by the end of this video, you'll get the full truth behind what was hidden in that barn. No clickbait, no drawn-out suspense just for views, just a mind-blowing, real-life unraveling that you have to see to believe. Now I know how easy it is to start a video, get a few minutes in, and then click away. But this one's different. Because the mystery doesn't unfold the way you think it will. And the person you'll suspect at the beginning? Let's just say they're not who you should be worried about. This story goes deeper than just a locked door. It digs into family dynamics, generational secrets, and that chilling moment when a child realizes that their parents are not who they believed they were. So if you've ever been intrigued by real hidden discoveries, unresolved mysteries, family betrayals, or secret rooms, or if you're the kind of person who can't stop watching until you get every piece of the puzzle, stay with me. You're going to want to see how this ends. Carter lived with his dad, Alan James, a quiet, blue-collar man in his early 40s with a stern face, rough hands, and a strict sense of routine. To the outside world, Alan seemed like your average hardworking American dad. He worked at the local mill, paid his bills on time, and kept to himself. Widowed a few years back, he raised Carter mostly on his own. There was no drama, no known issues, no reason to question anything. But Alan had one rule, and it was the kind of rule you don't question if you want to avoid a long, uncomfortable silence. The barn, an old, weathered structure that sat at the far edge of the property, was strictly off-limits. It was always padlocked. Carter wasn't even allowed near it. Anytime he asked about it, his dad would get oddly tense. "Just old junk," Alan would mutter, or "nothing you need to worry about." But there was always something strange about how he said it, too quick, too dismissive, like he was trying to cover something. Like he was afraid. Now here's where things take a turn. That afternoon, Carter was practicing his kicks, trying to nail that top corner shot he'd seen in a messy highlight reel. He lined up, focused, and let the ball fly. Except he overshot it. The ball sailed high, curved left, and smacked against the side of the barn with a dull thud, bouncing off and rolling to a stop beside the barn doors. Carter ran after it, brushing off dirt from his shorts. He bent down to grab it, but that's when he noticed something strange. The lock on the barn wasn't latched. It was just hanging there, as if someone had forgotten to secure it. Now think about this for a second. If there's one place your parent always tells you never to go, and one day, that place just happens to be unlocked, what would you do? I want you to really picture this moment. A warm breeze. The creak of the old barn doors. Dust in the sunlight. Carter's heart thudding in his chest as he wraps his fingers around the rusty handle. His dog Duke whines behind him, as if sensing something's wrong. That gut instinct we talked about earlier? Yeah, it was screaming now. But Carter was a curious kid. And curiosity, especially when it's been bottled up for years, is powerful. Almost unstoppable. He slowly pulls open the door, just enough to squeeze inside. And what he sees in that dark, stale air is not what anyone expected. Now, I could drop the reveal right here. I could show you exactly what Carter saw. But I'm not going to do that just yet. Because it's not just what was inside the barn, it's what it meant. And once you see the full story unfold, you'll understand why this moment was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would bring police to their door. Something that would make headlines. Something that would shatter Carter's trust in the one person he thought he knew best. So here's the deal. If you're into real-life mystery stories, dark family secrets, and mind-blowing discoveries that seem ripped from a Netflix docuseries, you're in the right place. We're going all the way with this one. Every twist, every clue, every dark truth that was buried under years of lies. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why that ball landing at the barn wasn't just a lucky accident. It was destiny. A crack in the surface that revealed the ugly truth beneath. And I promise, by the end of this video, you'll finally see everything Carter saw inside that barn. The full truth. The terrifying connection. The reason this family was never going to be the same again. But right now, all you need to know is this. Carter stepped through those barn doors expecting maybe some old tools or broken furniture. Instead, he found something that made his knees go weak. Something that made him back away slowly, heart racing, mind spinning. And just as he turned to run, a shadow moved behind him. Something or someone was already inside. Carter didn't scream when he saw the shadow move behind him. He froze. His breath caught in his throat like a fist had wrapped around his lungs, squeezing just enough to make him aware of how alone he was. The barn smelled like mold and something older, like metal and time left to rot. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light slicing through broken wooden slats, he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Tools, sure, but not the kind you'd use for fixing fences or tractors. These were different. Strange devices with wires and tubes. Jars filled with something. And pinned to the far wall, a massive corkboard covered in photographs, maps, and scribbled notes, like something you'd see in a true crime documentary. One photo in particular stood out. It was of Carter from the back, walking to school just days ago. Suddenly, that shadow behind him didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt personal. To understand how things got here, you've got to rewind a bit. Carter wasn't the kind of kid who snooped around or made trouble just for the thrill of it. He was quiet, thoughtful, always observing, the kind of kid teachers called mature for his age. After his mom died in a car accident 3 years earlier, an event no one in town talked about anymore, he changed. People noticed but didn't push. Small towns like theirs have a way of letting silence do the heavy lifting. Alan, Carter's dad, never really talked about her passing, either. He just tightened up, became more rigid, more closed off. His affection turned mechanical. Did you eat? Replaced I love you. Chores were doubled. Curfews were strict. And above all else, the barn rule became sacred. That was the only real boundary Alan insisted on with any real force. But in the weeks leading up to the barn discovery, Carter had started noticing things that didn't sit right. Like how Alan had begun taking late-night drives, coming back long after Carter was in bed, the gravel driveway crunching beneath the tires just as the sky was turning gray. He thought maybe his dad had picked up a second job to help with money, but when he asked, Alan snapped, quickly, sharply, more like someone hiding guilt than exhaustion. Carter also noticed new packages arriving at the house, plain brown boxes without return addresses. Alan would rush to collect them before Carter could peek. Once, Carter found one left on the porch while his dad was still at work. It was surprisingly heavy and made a faint humming sound. By the time Carter had barely touched it, Alan had come screeching up the drive and snatched it from his hands without a word. That night, Carter heard him on the phone, talking in a low voice to someone named Redmond, repeating the phrase, "It's almost ready." At school, things weren't much better. Carter's teachers had started calling home, saying he seemed distracted, distant. He wasn't turning in homework. He was zoning out in class. A few of his friends noticed it, too, especially Miles, his closest buddy since kindergarten. But whenever Miles asked if Carter was okay, he'd just shrug it off. After all, what could he say? Hey, my dad might be hiding something inside a barn he never lets anyone go near? It sounded paranoid. It felt paranoid. Until it didn't. You see, around that same time, a few strange things started happening in town. A neighbor's dog went missing. Then 2 more. The sheriff's office put out a vague notice about possible coyotes, but everyone knew that was just something they said when they didn't know anything. Then came the power surges, rolling blackouts hitting just a few houses at a time, all clustered around Carter's neighborhood. Alan had started stockpiling batteries and solar chargers, and when Carter asked why, his dad said it was for the grid collapse.
Carter didn't know what that meant.
It wasn't the kind of thing other dads were worried about. And then there were the visitors. Carter noticed them most on weekends, strangers pulling up in quiet black cars, staying for only a few minutes before vanishing again. One man wore a long coat, even in 90-degree heat. Another had a scar that curved down his cheek like it was drawn on with a knife. Once, Carter watched his dad hand one of them a thick envelope through the window, an envelope that disappeared into the man's coat as quickly as the handshake that followed. There were no introductions, no names exchanged. Just silence and tension. It all added up to something, but Carter couldn't figure out what. What made things even stranger was how the town treated Alan. No one really liked him, but no one ever questioned him, either. The pastor at the local church always nodded politely, but never invited him to potlucks. The sheriff, a stocky guy named Bill Harper, used to be friends with Alan back in high school, but now they barely spoke. Yet Harper once told Carter something odd while helping clean up after a school fundraiser. "Your dad's a complicated man," he'd said, staring off at nothing in particular. "He's got his reasons." When Carter asked what he meant, Harper just shook his head. "Best not to poke around where you're not supposed to. Some doors stay closed for a reason." So when Carter stepped into that barn, he wasn't just breaking a rule, he was crossing a threshold into something deeply hidden. And now, standing frozen inside the barn with a shadow moving behind him, he realized something terrifying. Maybe his dad wasn't just private. Maybe he wasn't just dealing with grief or being overprotective. Maybe, just maybe, he was involved in something dangerous. Something secret. And Carter was now standing right in the middle of it. But here's where things get even more twisted. Because later that evening, after Carter managed to slip back out of the barn without being seen, he tried to act normal. He pretended he had just gone inside for a snack, hoping his dad wouldn't notice anything off. But Alan was already watching him. Not with anger, but with something far more chilling. Awareness. Like he knew Carter had seen something. Like he had expected this day to come. At dinner, Alan didn't speak. He barely touched his food. Instead, he stared at Carter in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. And then Alan said something Carter would never forget. "If you ever go in there again, you won't like what happens next." No yelling. No threats. Just calm, quiet certainty. That's what made it so scary. Because Carter believed him. He believed every word. What Carter didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that someone else had also been watching the barn. A neighbor? A friend? A stranger? Someone had taken a photo of Carter going inside, and they had just sent it to an unlisted number. The message was simple. No name. No context. The kid knows. And whoever received that message, they were already on their way. The next morning, everything felt off. Carter woke up to the sharp clatter of birds outside his window, but there was something else in the air, something you couldn't name, but could feel crawling under your skin. He rushed downstairs hoping to sneak another peek at the barn while Alan was still asleep, but instead found his dad already in the kitchen, sipping coffee, dressed and alert like he hadn't slept at all. The strange part? He didn't say a word. Not a good morning, not even a glance. Just a stillness that wrapped around him like a suit of armor. That's when Carter noticed the barn keys, the ring that usually dangled from a hook near the fridge, were gone. Not just missing, but as if they'd never been there. And when Carter casually walked past the kitchen window, The barn door, which had always been secured with a heavy-duty padlock, now had a brand-new digital lock installed. No keypad. Just a sleek, black panel that blinked red like an unspoken warning. Alan was tightening the perimeter, and Carter knew he was losing his window to find answers. Later that day, Carter skipped school. He couldn't concentrate, not with everything unraveling so fast. He needed help, or at least someone to talk to who wouldn't brush him off. Miles was the obvious choice, but something in Carter held him back. Instead, he took a chance and biked to the town library, hoping to dig into old records, news archives, anything that might shed light on what his dad had been involved in. The librarian, Ms. Hastings, was in her 60s, always kind but not one for small talk. When Carter asked about newspaper archives from the early 2000s, she looked at him like she was about to say something, then just nodded and pointed to the microfilm section. That hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Something was definitely wrong. Hours passed as Carter scrolled through old headlines, missing persons reports, obituaries, even classified ads, until one small article caught his eye. It was dated 18 years ago, just before Carter was born. The headline read, "Local scientist cleared of charges in missing patient case." The name jumped out at him, Alan Pierce. His dad. The article was vague, legal-sounding, filled with deflections and quiet omissions. But the heart of it was chilling. A woman had disappeared from a private research facility just outside of town. No body, no evidence, no leads. The facility? Now defunct. Privately funded. No trace left except a ghost on paper. Alan had been listed as a consultant. The article mentioned his clearance from any wrongdoing, but even at 16, Carter could read between the lines. Someone had pulled strings to bury the truth. When Carter printed the article and stuffed it into his backpack, Ms. Hastings suddenly appeared behind him, startling him so badly he almost dropped the paper. She leaned in, lowered her voice, and said something he wasn't prepared to hear. "Whatever you're looking for, Carter, don't. Some things in this town are meant to stay buried." He looked up at her, startled. "Did you know my dad worked at that facility?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, her silence screaming louder than words. As Carter stepped outside the library, the wind picked up. A chill rolled down his spine despite the sun beaming overhead. He turned the corner to grab his bike and stopped cold. The bike was gone. In its place, a single folded piece of paper had been tucked into the slot of the bike rack. He opened it with trembling fingers. 3 words were scrawled in uneven handwriting, written with something that smelled like motor oil. "You were warned." He looked around, heart pounding, but the street was empty. No cars. No people. Just the low hum of something far too quiet. He called Miles for a ride, but it went straight to voicemail. Same thing with his neighbor across the street. For the first time since this all began, Carter felt isolated in a way that wasn't just physical, it was strategic. Like someone was slowly removing the supports from beneath him, one by one. And that wasn't even the worst part. When he finally got home, Alan's truck wasn't in the driveway. Relieved, Carter ran to his room, dug out the article from his backpack, and slid it under his mattress. But when he opened his closet to hide the backpack, something new caught his eye. Taped to the inside of the closet door, where nothing had ever been before, was a Polaroid photo. The kind no one used anymore. It was old, yellowed around the edges. In the photo, a much younger Alan stood beside a group of people in lab coats. Their faces were blurred, not by the camera, but deliberately scratched out with a pen. All except one. Carter's mom. She was smiling, and standing just inches behind her, half-shaded, was the same man Carter had seen in the black car weeks earlier. The one with the scar. His mother had been at the facility. She had known. And now she was gone. Before Carter could process what that meant, headlights swept across the front window.
He ducked.
A car had pulled into the driveway. Not Alan's truck. A black sedan. Same one. Someone stepped out, left the engine running, and approached the front door. Then 3 slow knocks. Everything in Carter screamed to run, to hide, to scream for help. But something stronger kept him rooted. That same pull that had dragged him toward the barn, toward the truth, toward the unraveling threads of a life he no longer understood. And when the door creaked open, no one was there. Just a manila envelope on the porch. Inside, a single sheet of paper.
Typed.
No signature. No name. She tried to stop him. He made her disappear. Now it's your turn. And just like that, Carter realized something horrifying. His mother hadn't died in an accident. She had been erased. Carter barely slept that night. Every creak in the house felt like a whisper of danger. Every shadow stretched a little too long, lingered a second too late. He kept the manila envelope tucked under his pillow like it might shield him, like it could somehow protect him from the next thing that would inevitably come. His mind kept replaying the words. She tried to stop him. He made her disappear. Over and over, until it no longer felt like a message. It felt like a sentence. A warning carved in ice. But something about the phrasing gnawed at him. She tried to stop him didn't sound accidental. It sounded like his mom had discovered something, maybe even confronted his dad. And if she'd been trying to stop him, what exactly was she trying to stop? What was Alan Pierce doing behind those barn walls that had the power to make a person vanish? The next day, just after dawn, a text popped up on Carter's phone that made the room tilt. It was from Miles, finally. But the message was weird, short, and formal, not the kind of thing a best friend would usually send. Just a screenshot of an email, no caption, no context. The email was addressed to Miles, tucker01@gmail.com, and came from a strange, jumbled sender ID, like it had been routed through layers of fake accounts. The subject line said, "You're asking the wrong questions." The body of the message was even more unsettling. Just one line. Tell your friend to stop digging. The same thing that happened to her will happen to him. Carter's heart nearly stopped. Her. It had to be referring to his mom. He called Miles immediately, but again, straight to voicemail. He tried texting back, asking where he was, what the message meant, if he was okay, but got nothing. The silence felt thick, like someone had pressed a pillow over the whole town. Carter rode his dad's old mountain bike, the only one left after his own had vanished, and pedaled frantically to Miles' house. When he got there, the place looked normal, too normal. No police tape, no smashed windows. But something was definitely off. The mailbox was stuffed with unopened letters. The lights inside were off. And when he knocked on the door, it creaked open slightly under his fist. The inside of the house was quiet, still, undisturbed. But Miles was gone. Carter stepped inside, calling his friend's name, heart pounding in his throat. The house wasn't trashed, no signs of struggle, but things were abandoned. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the kitchen counter, soggy and forgotten. Miles' shoes were by the door. His phone charger was still plugged into the wall. But there was no sign of him. What Carter did find, though, turned everything sideways. Taped to the fridge was a photo. A Polaroid, like the one Carter had found in his own closet. Only this time, the photo wasn't of Alan or the lab, it was of Carter, standing outside the barn, holding the soccer ball, completely unaware the picture had even been taken. Written across the bottom in thick red Sharpie were the words, "He doesn't know who he is." Carter stumbled backward. The kitchen felt like it was closing in on him. He grabbed the photo and fled the house, his mind unraveling with questions. What did that mean? He doesn't know who he is.
Who was watching him?
And more importantly, what did they know that he didn't? Back at home, Carter decided he couldn't stay quiet anymore. He had to confront his dad. He waited for Alan to come home that evening, and as the truck pulled into the driveway, Carter noticed something different. His father wasn't alone. A woman sat in the passenger seat. She looked tired, her face pale, eyes darting nervously. Carter had never seen her before. She didn't get out of the truck. Alan walked inside without a word and closed the door behind him like nothing was strange. Carter waited 10 minutes, then crept outside and made his way to the truck. The woman was gone, like she had vanished into thin air. The passenger seat was empty, but on the dash, Carter noticed something, an old, beat-up photo album. He reached through the open window and grabbed it, heart racing. He opened it back inside his room, flipping through the dusty pages, and what he found hit him like a punch to the ribs. Photos of his mother.
Pregnant.
Holding a baby that looked like him, but the dates didn't match. There were photos of Carter as a toddler with people he didn't recognize, in places he had no memory of. And then something even worse. A photo of two infants, twins. One labeled Carter. The other labeled Asher. Carter didn't have a twin. He couldn't have a twin. He would have remembered. Unless he'd been told otherwise. He stared at the photo, fingers trembling. His name, in faded black ink, stared back at him like a lie slowly peeling open. Asher.
Who was Asher?
Was that a middle name? A brother? A twin no one ever mentioned? The more he stared at the photo, the more something deep in his memory began to tug at him. A sound. A voice. A second crib in the corner of a room he could almost remember. Before he could piece it together, his phone buzzed again. Another text. No name. Just coordinates and a short message. You'll find the rest here. Come alone. Midnight. And beneath that, a final sentence. Bring the photo. It was clear now, he wasn't just uncovering secrets. He was the secret, and someone was going to make sure he never remembered the truth. The air had never felt heavier. Carter stood in the dark corner of his bedroom, the old photo album clutched tightly to his chest, as if it could somehow ground him amid the chaos spiraling around him. His thoughts were racing, tangled and messy, unable to land on any single idea long enough to make sense of it. Asher. That name echoed like a ghost through his mind, dragging up flashes of memory that didn't belong to the life he thought he'd lived. A blue blanket with stars. A laugh that sounded too much like his own. A scream in the dark, years ago, that he once believed was just a nightmare. Now, nothing felt safe. Not his home, not his memories, and certainly not the people around him. The house had grown too quiet. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the hallway clock, even the wind brushing against the windows. But not his father. Not even a footstep. It was as if Alan had vanished. Again. Carter's fingers hovered over the GPS coordinates, still glowing on his phone screen. He had less than an hour before midnight, and something inside him knew he'd never sleep until he saw where that pin dropped. Against every instinct, every ounce of fear screaming for him to stop, he stuffed the photo album into his backpack, zipped up his hoodie, and slipped out the back door. He walked the first few blocks, eyes darting over his shoulder, scanning the street for signs that he was being watched. Every car that passed, every shadow cast by a tree under the streetlight made his pulse jump. Then came the sound. At first it was distant, like a soft roll of thunder. Only it didn't fade. It sharpened, grew louder, and began to follow him. Tires. Slow. Deliberate. Matching his steps. Carter turned quickly into a side alley, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He ducked behind a row of trash bins and held his breath. A black SUV crawled past the opening of the alley. No headlights. Just the soft hum of an engine and the sickening glow of red taillights as it rolled to a stop up ahead. Carter's instincts screamed run. He bolted down the alley, emerging on the next block and cutting across yards until he reached the edge of town where the GPS map began guiding him into the woods that bordered the old industrial park. The further he walked, the less sure of anything he became. This didn't feel like an answer waiting to be uncovered. It felt like a trap. But he had come this far. And the closer he got to the pin, the more he felt something shifting, like the story of his life was unraveling from both ends at once. The coordinates led him to a rusted-out gate near the edge of a collapsed building that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. A weathered sign still hung from the chain-link fence, tilted sideways. Property of Pierce Biotech. His father's company. The one from the article. He froze. This place had been part of it all, and now he stood at its gates. He climbed over the fencing, careful not to trip the loose wires, and followed the overgrown path toward the crumbling remains of the structure. The wind picked up again, colder this time, like it carried the whispers of everything left unsaid. He stepped into what was once a lobby, flashlights sweeping across shattered glass, rusting equipment, and overturned chairs. It was hard to believe this place had once been a facility with scientists and experiments and people. It looked more like a tomb now. That's when he heard it. A noise behind him. Not wind. Not rubble shifting. A footstep. Carter spun around, light darting across the walls, but no one was there. The room was still.
Dead.
He moved forward, deeper into the shell of the building, until he found what looked like a locked door leading to a basement. The keypad beside it had long since lost power, but the door had been forced open, recently. Fresh scrape marks along the edge. Someone had been here. Maybe they still were. Carter took a deep breath and stepped inside. The basement reeked of mold and old chemicals. His light caught glimpses of old charts pinned to corkboards, broken filing cabinets, and photographs littering the floor. But what stopped him cold was a large whiteboard propped against the wall. On it, a family tree, partial, hastily drawn. At the top, Pierce line. And beneath it, his father's name.
Alan.
Then, connected by red lines, two names beneath. Carter and Asher. A third line extended from Carter's name, labeled only with a question mark. He stepped back, shaking, and turned toward the table behind him. A laptop. Still warm. Active. Someone was just here. He moved toward it, reaching for the lid, when the screen flashed and a message popped up. Run. He turned, and standing in the doorway was a man. Not Alan. Not a stranger. Miles. Only it wasn't the Miles Carter knew. His face was pale, eyes wide with something that wasn't fear, but recognition. He lifted a shaky hand and whispered something that made Carter's blood run ice cold. They took my memory, too. But before Carter could respond, lights flooded the hallway behind him. Flashlights. Boots on concrete. Voices speaking low and fast. They weren't alone anymore. And Carter wasn't sure who he could trust. Not even himself. The sound of footsteps pounding through the halls was deafening. Carter froze, every instinct inside him screaming to run, but it was Miles' expression that held him in place. There was something off, not just about the way he looked, pale and worn like he hadn't slept in days, but the way he spoke, like he knew things he shouldn't. They took my memory, too. The words hung there like a slow leak from a gas line, invisible but choking. Carter's brain was firing on all cylinders, trying to process the hundreds of things that had suddenly clicked into place and simultaneously come undone. Miles, the one person he trusted, the one constant in this spiraling nightmare, wasn't who he thought he was, and maybe never had been. But before Carter could ask the questions screaming inside his head, the floodlights behind them flared brighter, and a sharp voice cracked through the stairwell, ordering them both to freeze. Miles grabbed Carter's arm and yanked him backward into the shadows, the two of them stumbling through a narrow passage behind the collapsed storage room, a route Miles somehow knew without hesitation. They burst through an old fire escape and took off into the woods behind the facility, the shouts growing fainter behind them. They didn't stop until the voices were gone, and the only sounds left were their ragged breathing and the crickets chirping under the blanket of a clouded moon. Carter finally turned on him, demanding answers. But what Miles said next shattered the entire framework of the mystery Carter thought he was unraveling. "I'm not just your friend," Miles said, eyes locked on Carter's. "I'm your handler." The world tipped sideways. Carter couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stared. Handler? What did that even mean? Miles looked genuinely shaken, like he'd just said something forbidden. He continued, voice low and trembling, explaining that the company, Pierce Biotech, hadn't just been an agricultural research lab. It was part of a secretive military-backed program under the radar for over 2 decades. Alan Pierce wasn't just a brilliant biochemist and geneticist. He pioneered something dangerous. Something classified. The facility hadn't been shut down because of budget cuts, as the newspaper once claimed. It had been raided, silenced, covered up. Carter had been part of a trial. He wasn't supposed to remember. Neither was Miles. Their entire childhood friendship had been fabricated.
Staged.
Created as part of an observational experiment to test the limits of memory suppression and identity rewriting. Miles had originally been assigned to monitor Carter's behavior for signs of leakage, mental lapses where fragments of the truth might resurface. But after a certain point, the lines blurred for him too. Miles began remembering things that weren't part of his file. Real moments. Real emotions. The friendship had stopped being fake a long time ago. Carter staggered back, a scream bottled somewhere in his chest that wouldn't come out. Everything he knew, his family, his memories, his sense of self, was a carefully orchestrated lie. That moment in the barn, when he'd kicked the ball and stumbled onto the hatch, wasn't the beginning of a mystery. It was a glitch in the simulation of his life. A forgotten variable in an equation meant to stay perfectly balanced. He wasn't uncovering a conspiracy. He was the conspiracy. The photo of Asher hadn't been an accident. There really had been two of them. Carter was part of a cloning experiment. He and Asher had been the original split subjects in a classified genetics program designed to test not only the viability of human cloning, but the emotional and cognitive effects of growing up separated, yet monitored. The twin wasn't lost.
He'd been taken.
Relocated. Isolated. Programmed differently. One controlled. One observed. Carter had been the latter. But something had gone wrong. His mother, maybe the only person who knew the truth, had tried to stop the experiment, threatening to go public. She'd disappeared soon after. And, the worst part, Carter had helped bury the truth. His memory had been wiped. Miles had been reassigned. His father, if that's who Alan truly was, had stayed behind as the last node of control. The man behind the curtain, pulling strings Carter never saw until they began unraveling. Suddenly, Carter felt sick. Not just mentally, but physically, like something inside of him was turning against itself. He dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach, sweat pouring down his face. Miles knelt beside him, panicked now, explaining that it was happening faster than it should, that the suppression sequence was breaking down. "You were never supposed to make it this far," he said. "They're trying to reboot you. Erase everything you've remembered." Carter could barely hear him. His ears were ringing, his vision blurring, and through the haze, he saw something or someone, standing between the trees. Watching.
Still. Silent.
Another boy, his same height, his same face. But not him. And then he was gone. Vanished into the night like a ghost.
A glitch.
Or maybe the original. Miles pulled Carter to his feet. "We're out of time," he whispered. "If you want to know the truth, the real truth, we have to find Asher before they do. Because somewhere out there was a version of Carter that hadn't been monitored, programmed, or rewritten. And he might be the only one who remembered what really happened." Carter didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, fragments that felt like memories but carried none of the emotional glue to bind them into something solid. A woman's voice calling him Asher. A cold metal table under his back. Red light blinking overhead. Miles, younger, wearing a white coat instead of a hoodie, holding a clipboard and not a game controller. His brain was like a shattered mirror, every shard reflecting a different reality, each one too dangerous to believe and too familiar to ignore. They had made him believe he had a childhood, a life, even friends, but it was all manipulated, edited like footage in a propaganda film. He wasn't just living a lie, he had been built inside one. They were hiding out in a condemned trailer on the edge of the old train yard, the windows boarded, the air thick with mildew. Miles had scrounged up some burner phones, energy bars, and a few pieces of stolen intel from his old contact at the biotech company. None of it made Carter feel any safer. If anything, knowing how deep this went only made it worse. Because now the danger wasn't just about being hunted. It was about the growing possibility that the people Carter loved, the people he trusted, were either part of it or knew and said nothing. That thought gnawed at him until he couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to see Alan. Against Miles' protests, Carter slipped out before dawn and made the long trek back to town through the drainage tunnel behind the school. His phone had been wiped, his digital trail carefully scrubbed by Miles, but if they were really tracking him on a biological level, like the documents hinted, it wouldn't matter how well he hid. They'd find him. But Carter wasn't running anymore. He needed answers, even if they came from a liar's mouth. He needed to look his father in the eyes and ask the one question that had been killing him since the barn. Why me? Alan was in the kitchen when Carter walked through the back door, calmly sipping coffee as if nothing had happened, as if his world hadn't just been shattered. He looked older than Carter remembered. More tired. Not surprised. You weren't supposed to find it, Alan said softly, not even turning around. Carter's legs nearly buckled. So it's all true? Alan turned then, slowly, eyes rimmed with red, as if he'd been crying for days but refused to break. Not everything, but enough. The words that followed came out like poison from a wound, slow, painful, necessary. Alan confessed that Carter had been part of a classified program launched during the early 2000s, when gene editing was still in its gray zone. Pierce Biotech had been selected to run an off-the-books trial, Project Halcyon. Its goal wasn't just cloning, it was memory engineering, emotional conditioning, and behavioral modulation. Children raised in isolated but natural conditions, with backstories inserted and controlled like lines of code. Carter and Asher had been the flagship experiment. Identical DNA, diverging environments, monitored outcomes. The company believed they could build the perfect operative, one who didn't know they were an operative. But you let it happen to me, Carter said, voice shaking, the betrayal cracking through every syllable. You let them use me like a lab rat. I tried to stop it, Alan said. But I wasn't just your father. I was also the lead scientist. I was told that if I backed out, they'd erase you completely. That was the ultimatum. Let the experiment continue under his supervision, or lose Carter entirely. You chose your job over me, Carter whispered. I chose to keep you alive, Alan replied, voice breaking. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. Carter turned away, everything inside of him unraveling. He could feel it in his bones, the push and pull of identities fighting for space in his brain.
Carter.
Asher. Subject 07B. He didn't know who he was anymore. And now, standing in the kitchen of a man who once kissed his scraped knees and taught him to ride a bike, he saw a stranger. A stranger who'd helped orchestrate the biggest betrayal of his life. Alan stepped forward, desperate, but Carter raised a hand to stop him. If you want to help me now, really help me, then tell me where they're keeping Asher. Alan hesitated. The silence said more than the words that followed. They moved him. Where? Carter demanded. I don't know, Alan said. They went dark after the second trial failed. But Carter could see it, he did know. He was lying again. Protecting the program, or protecting himself. Either way, the truth was just out of reach. Then came the final blow. Alan reached into the cupboard and handed Carter a thumb drive. They're not after you, because you remembered, he said. They're after you, because you're the only one who survived. That one sentence sucked all the air out of the room. Carter staggered back, eyes fixed on the tiny piece of plastic in his palm. What happened to the others? Alan didn't answer. Carter ran. He sprinted out the door, through the backyard, back to the woods where Miles was waiting. And when he got there, breathless and wide-eyed, Miles didn't need to ask what happened. He just pointed to the burner phone lighting up in his hand. They found us. And Carter knew, whatever choice he made next would define the rest of his life. Should I continue with Carter being forced to choose between exposing the truth or escaping before it's too late? The wind howled through the broken slats of the train yard shelter as Carter and Miles crouched low behind a stack of rusted steel drums, watching headlights cut through the trees in synchronized formation. SUVs, blacked out and silent, moved like sharks through the darkness, surrounding the area without a single word spoken. Whoever they were, government, corporate, or something worse, they weren't local police. These weren't the kind of people who knocked on doors. They were the type who came to erase loose ends. And Carter had just found out he was the biggest one still breathing. Miles cursed under his breath and pulled Carter back into the shadows. They're using pulse jammers. Any comms we had are dead. This is a sweep and collect. His voice was thin, tense, teetering on panic, but behind his eyes Carter saw something else. Fear mixed with guilt. A look that had become all too familiar. How did they find us? Carter demanded, heart racing. Miles hesitated. Too long. Carter grabbed him by the jacket. How, Miles? And then the silence cracked wide open. I told them where we were. Time slowed. The air left Carter's lungs like he'd been punched in the chest. He stared at the only person he still trusted, waiting for him to say it was a mistake, that he was being forced, that he was trying to protect them both. But the look in Miles' eyes was already apologizing for what he couldn't explain fast enough. I thought I could control it, he said. I thought if I gave them just enough, they'd let you go. Let you disappear. I didn't know they were going to mobilize this fast. Carter stumbled back. His mind reeled, trying to stitch this betrayal into the already tangled fabric of lies he'd uncovered. Miles had been there since the beginning, since the barn, since the first clue, since the first moment Carter had dared to question who he really was. And now it turned out he'd been the leash the whole time. The illusion of choice. The illusion of friendship. Maybe even that had been programmed into him. You lied to me, Carter said, barely able to speak. I tried to save you. Miles shot back, voice cracking. You don't know what they've done to the others. You don't know what they'll do to you. You're the last clean iteration, Carter. Everyone else, Asher included, they're unstable. Dangerous. They think you're the key to restarting the program. And they'll kill to keep that knowledge contained. The thumb drive in Carter's pocket felt like it was burning through his skin. On it was everything Alan had given him, research logs, subject files, video footage from inside the facility before the fire, even correspondence between Pierce Biotech and an unnamed defense contractor flagged only with a black triangle and the codename Echo Directive. This wasn't just about memory engineering or cloning. This was about building soldiers, emotionless, programmable assets disguised as sons, friends, neighbors. Designed not to question, not to feel, only to obey. Carter wasn't the only one who'd been turned into a weapon. He was just the only one who still had a soul. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the loudspeakers, now mounted on one of the SUVs outside.
Calm.
Cold. Measured. Subject 07B. You have 1 minute to surrender. If you do not comply, lethal force will be authorized. We will not ask again. Carter froze. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It took him a moment to place it, but when he did, the weight of the betrayal nearly knocked him to his knees. It was his therapist. The woman he'd been seeing for years. The one who first told him to journal through the confusion, who encouraged him to lean into his dreams, who'd suggested maybe his father wasn't being entirely honest. She'd been the one who nudged him into rediscovering the truth, who made him believe he was in control of his awakening. She'd been guiding him into the trap the entire time. Carter turned toward Miles, his rage boiling over. How many of you were there? Miles looked down, ashamed.
3. Me.
Her. And a shot rang out. Glass shattered. Miles fell to the ground, blood spreading beneath him like ink on paper. Carter didn't even hear the scream that left his throat. He grabbed Miles' jacket, shook him, screamed for him to stay awake, but the look in Miles' eyes had already changed, gone from guilt to release. His last breath was a broken whisper. Run. But Carter didn't run. He grabbed the thumb drive. He grabbed Miles' phone. And then, with nothing left to lose, he stepped out into the floodlights with both hands raised, not in surrender, but in defiance. They wanted Subject 07B. They were about to meet him. Rain pounded the rooftop of the glass compound like 1,000 fists as Carter was escorted through the echoing corridor, his hands zip-tied, face bruised, and shirt soaked through from the storm. The inside of the Pierce Biotech facility was sterile and gleaming, but beneath the shine was a darkness that couldn't be scrubbed clean, a stench of secrecy and steel. The hallways were lined with mirror-like panels, and as Carter was marched forward, he saw his reflection again and again, or was it? For a moment, he thought the figure walking beside him in the glass was someone else, slightly taller, a different gait, the same face but with eyes that didn't flinch. He blinked.
Gone.
Just his own reflection again. Or so he hoped. They brought him to the core chamber, circular, domed, humming with quiet power. Monitors covered every inch of the walls, displaying biometric data, neurological scans, surveillance footage going back years. It was as if his entire life had been captured and dissected in real time. But it wasn't just his life. Carter's eyes darted across the screens. There were hundreds of profiles. Subjects A through T, numbered and tagged like livestock. Some faces he recognized from his school, his neighborhood. A cashier from the local gas station. A classmate who disappeared mid-semester.
Even his old baseball coach.
All pieces of a grotesque puzzle. The scale of the conspiracy was monstrous. This wasn't just about him. He was just the last one still functioning. The lead scientist entered the room, a tall, silver-haired man with a voice that felt like broken glass under bare feet. His name was Dr. Evan Calder, a ghost name Carter had seen in old research files, but never imagined he'd meet in person. He looked at Carter not with hate, but with curiosity, like a child inspecting a machine that suddenly started thinking for itself. "You were never supposed to be conscious," Calder said coolly. "Your programming was the cleanest we ever achieved. But somehow you cracked. You evolved. The rest, they turned violent. Unstable. You became human." Carter clenched his fists, the plastic ties digging into his skin. "Is that what this was about? Seeing if you could manufacture a conscience?" "No," Calder replied, stepping closer. "It was about perfecting loyalty. But conscience was an unexpected variable." Carter spat at his feet. "You killed them. You experimented on kids. You stole their lives." "We built something better," Calder said. "And then we learned the hard way. Humanity isn't a bug. It's a virus." With a nod, Calder motioned to the guards. They brought in a second figure, shackled, masked, dragging their feet. When the mask was removed, Carter's stomach dropped. Asher. Same face. Same eyes. But hollowed out, blank, almost feral. He didn't even blink when Carter whispered his name. Calder stepped between them, smiling with a predator's calm. He never evolved. He remained obedient. And now, he will correct our mistake. The lights dimmed. An automated voice confirmed biometric scans. Doors sealed. Carter realized what was happening, a live test. A final confrontation. Not just physical, psychological. Asher had been programmed to see Carter as a threat, an anomaly. If Carter fought back, he'd be proving them right, that no subject could be trusted with self-awareness. If he refused to fight, Asher might kill him. The battle began with silence. No one spoke. No dramatic music, no shouting. Just two mirror images locked in a deadly rhythm. Carter ducked the first blow, slid across the floor, and tried to reach him. "Asher, listen to me. We were brothers once. They made us this way, but we don't have to be their weapons." Asher hesitated. 1 second.
2.
Then he lunged again, this time with brutal precision. Carter took the hit, rolled, and slammed his shoulder into a wall. Pain radiated up his arm, but he didn't stop. He looked into Asher's eyes and saw something flicker. Doubt, recognition, or maybe just a ghost of something lost. "They can't control us anymore," Carter gasped. "You're more than their code." Calder's voice cut through the speaker system like a whip. "Terminate the anomaly. Subject 07B is corrupt. Execute final protocol." Asher paused. Then, something extraordinary happened. He turned. Slowly. Deliberately. And faced Calder behind the observation glass. Carter didn't move. He didn't breathe. Asher took one step forward, then another. Alarms blared. The guards raised their rifles. But Asher didn't stop. And in that moment, Carter understood. The virus Calder feared wasn't humanity. It was choice. Asher slammed his fists into the glass wall. Once, twice, a third time. It spiderwebbed, cracked, and with a final roar, shattered into 1,000 shards. The guards opened fire. Bullets tore through the air, but Carter had already launched himself behind the central console, grabbing a loose cable and jamming it into the control panel. Sparks flew. The lights blew out. Chaos. When it was over, Carter lay on the ground, smoke curling from the scorched monitors. Asher was gone. Whether escaped, dead, or free, Carter didn't know. Calder was slumped against the far wall, a piece of glass buried in his neck, gurgling his last breath. The compound's security systems crashed, alarms blaring in fractured loops. And then silence. But just as Carter stumbled to his feet, coughing through the haze, a voice echoed from a hidden speaker, calmer, older, feminine. You've passed Phase 1, Subject 07B. Prepare for extraction. Phase 2 begins now. Carter froze. It wasn't over. It had never been over. The sky over the compound was beginning to shift from darkness to gray as Carter walked out alone, shoulders slumped, face bruised, eyes wide open in a way they had never been before. Smoke still curled from vents behind him, and distant sirens pierced the air, though no one seemed to be coming to stop him. Not anymore. The woods surrounding the biotech facility whispered like old ghosts as he made his way down the gravel path, his mind replaying everything, every name he saw on the monitors, every voice that had whispered warnings, every betrayal that had unraveled his world. He thought about Asher, and whether the flicker of humanity he saw in those final moments had been real or just what he needed to believe in order to survive. For the first time, he wasn't sure what had been programmed into him and what had grown from within. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being human wasn't about certainty at all. It was about choosing to believe, even when you don't have proof. Back in his neighborhood, everything looked the same on the surface. The rusting mailbox still leaned sideways at the end of the driveway. The old swing in the backyard swayed gently in the wind. His dad's locked barn, where it all began, still sat there, silent, the door creaking ever so slightly on its hinges. But Carter knew better now. There were things buried deeper than any shovel could reach, truths hidden behind ordinary smiles and familiar voices. He passed neighbors on the sidewalk who nodded hello, their eyes betraying nothing. He couldn't help but wonder how many of them were part of it, knowingly or not. How many had been watching him from the beginning. The world hadn't changed, but his lens had. Trust had become something dangerous. Yet, there was still something inside him, call it hope, call it defiance, that refused to be crushed. That was his final rebellion. Not violence. Not revenge. But clarity. He didn't return to school. He didn't check in with the authorities. Instead, he began to quietly unravel the network from within. Using what he'd learned at the compound, Carter traced digital footprints, pulled threads that others had missed, and uncovered names, files, and locations tied to Project Helix, the government-backed experiment that had masqueraded as juvenile therapy, rehabilitation, even gifted child development programs. It was all a cover. He exposed it anonymously, little by little, releasing evidence into the world like embers from a dying fire. Some news outlets picked it up and ran the story. Most didn't. The ones who did were quickly buried under denials, red tape, and official statements. But even then, Carter didn't stop. Because he knew now, the truth didn't need permission to exist. It just needed a place to land. One day, weeks after everything had gone quiet, Carter received a package. No return address. Inside was a simple old Polaroid. 2 boys, maybe 12 years old, playing in a field. One of them was clearly Carter. The other, just barely recognizable as Asher. On the back was a message in block letters. We remember, even if they want us to forget. There was no signature, no sender. But Carter knew what it meant. Somewhere out there, others like him had survived. Maybe not intact, maybe not free, but aware. That was enough. As he sat on the edge of the porch, staring out at the sunset bleeding across the sky, Carter realized something he hadn't dared to admit before. He wasn't alone. And for all the fear, all the lies, and all the pain that had been stitched into the fabric of his life, there was still a future. One not dictated by someone else's design, but one he could shape with his own hands. Whether that future was safe, peaceful, or even long-lasting didn't matter. What mattered was that it was his. And just when he allowed himself to exhale, to feel a fleeting moment of calm, a shadow moved at the far end of the property line. Not fast. Not threatening. Just enough to be seen. It paused there, watching. Carter stood up slowly, heart steady, not scared this time. Whatever was coming next, he would face it. Because now he knew the rules, and he wasn't playing by theirs anymore. So if you ever wonder what's behind the doors we're told never to open, if you ever feel like something in your world doesn't quite add up, trust that instinct. Because sometimes what you uncover changes everything. And sometimes it changes you forever. Would you like a short trailer-style summary to use as the YouTube video's outro or pinned comment?